Awesome. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's definitely evening for some of you, almost morning on the other side of the day. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for our monthly Global Chamber Export Import Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services. SBPI Services represents several currency exchange companies and helps global businesses reduce the cost and the risk of rate fluctuations on their cross-border payments. In the US, we also broker business and equipment loans for American companies and offer private pronunciation coaching via Zoom for foreign business professionals wanting to speak region neutral American English. So, for anybody who's here for the first time or is not familiar with the Global Chamber, it is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over now 605 metro regions around the world. Its mission is to foster growth and cross border business in every region of the world, and I dare say they are accomplishing that. Our forum today is 55 minutes long. The last 5 to 10 minutes, I will open it up for Q&A and conversation, but until then, please make sure that you keep yourself on mute. I've got a couple of networking tips for you. First of all, it's a very good idea to use your full name here on Zoom anytime you're on a Zoom call so people know who you are and can find you afterwards. So go ahead and rename yourself. If you don't have your full name on there, you can do that by right-clicking on your square and the little three dots, and you can rename yourself there. And if you want to make it easy for people to find you afterward, please include your contact information and your LinkedIn link in the chat, and then make sure that you save the chat for future reference. So today we are very, very lucky to have the amazing Terry Patch with us. And let me tell you a little bit about Terry. This is going to be long, but she's incredibly accomplished, and there were just too many things that I did not want to leave out. So Terry Batch is the founder and principal of Batch Global Strategies, a strategic advisory firm dedicated to advancing inclusive international trade, investment promotion, and global market expansion. She advises on export readiness, foreign direct investment, and cross border economic development with a strong focus on equity and cultural fluency. Terry also serves as the president and CEO of Global LA, a public-private partnership dedicated to positioning Los Angeles as the leading global hub for business, innovation, and international collaboration. Terry has led landmark overseas initiatives in partnership with the U.S. embassies in Paris and Tokyo, and her international work has also included strategic engagements in London and Rimini, Italy. Terry spent over 20 years with the U.S. Department of Commerce, most recently serving as the inaugural director of the Global Diversity Export Initiative within the U.S. Commercial Service. During her federal tenure, Terry founded the Global China team, led the Global Design and Construction team, and served as export advisor to the Minority Business Development Agency. She co-led the White House Initiative on HBCU's International Affairs Cluster and co-founded Be Bold, which stands for Blacks Building Opportunities to Leverage Diversity. Terry has received that'd be nice, the bronze and silver medal awards from the U.S. Department of Commerce, as well as the prestigious William E. Morton Memorial Award for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion. She was a finalist for the LA Business Journal's DEI Leadership Award and a nominee for the LA Times Inspirational Women in Leadership Award. Terry is fluent in Mandarin Chinese and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from Spelman College and a Master of Public Administration from USC. So, welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm so glad we got this to work out. So, I always start my interviews off with three very quick icebreaker questions, like 60 seconds, and we'll move on. So, first question is, tell us how you got into this business.
Very interesting question and story, and I'll keep it brief. I will just say I'm originally from Georgia, so I'm a Southerner, and I went to an HBCU, so I attended Spelman College in Atlanta, and I had a professor who was we took a class called ADW, which is African Diaspora in the World, and so my ADW teacher, who was a China expert or a China person, I really kind of got connected with him, and he handed me a pamphlet my sophomore year. And he said, Terry, you're interested in international. And I knew I was interested in international something. I just didn't know what it was. And it was for a fellowship with the U.S. Department of Commerce. It was the Ron Brown Fellow. And I got that fellowship my sophomore year, and that was my pathway to work for the U.S. Department of Commerce after I graduated. It paid for part of my undergrad, paid for part of my grad school, and then gave me an opportunity to work for the U.S. Department of Commerce. So that's where I started, and that's how I got my foot in the door.
Wow. Okay, so it goes back a ways. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Really good. What do you like the best about what you do?
I love learning about new people and new cultures. I mean, and I think doing international business, it forces you out of your comfort zone and out of what is your norm to learn about a different culture, different people. And so that's what I like the most about all of this whole career is just being able to interact with people around the world and try to find, common ground. Obviously we're all the same. We're more the same than we're different, right? So I really
Absolutely.
enjoy learning about different cultures, different people, and trying to actually create some type of positive, movement, whether it's business or relationships or what have you. So that's what I've enjoyed the most.
Okay, so then the flip side of that coin is what do you like the least about what you do?
I thought about that question and I was like, man, what do I not like about what I do?
It doesn't have to
Um,
be anything if you sincerely love
you
everything and
know,
there's not one thing you don't like, but just in case there is, we want to know.
I will just say just the misconceptions that are out there. There's a lot of misconceptions from Americans about folks overseas and also from overseas about Americans. So that sometimes that can be really hard to overcome. Like you read in my bio that I I speak Chinese, and so I studied in China and also in Taiwan. And usually the first question I'm asked is, "Oh, how did they treat you? Did you have a good experience?" And I'm like, "Well, obviously I did because I wouldn't have kept learning the language." But I think it's just like kind of like an automatic, like, "Oh, well," and I've heard people say this, "Oh, I would never go there. They don't treat Black people well." But that's not necessarily true. Now, I've heard horror stories, don't get me wrong. But I think a lot of times when you you have misconceptions, they go far. So I've always tried to be really uh careful with how I characterize, especially a whole people, and also make
Cool.
sure that that doesn't creep in into how I do business.
Cool. That makes sense. That makes sense. So now let's get into all these questions I've been just dying to ask you. So the first one is this: why is exporting such a critical growth lever for minority-owned businesses today?
Well, I will say it's not just for minority owned businesses, it's for any business because we live in such a global economy. We're all dependent upon one another. And I think, from a minority business perspective, if we're not looking outside of our, and because this is a global conversation, right? If we're not looking outside of our immediate local economy, then we're missing so much. Even in the US, when I was with the Commerce Department, we would always say 95% of the world's consumers are outside of the US. So if you don't have any type of an international strategy, then you're limiting how much of an impact and how far your company can go. So I think even from a minority business perspective, if we're not looking outside of our community, looking outside of our country of origin, then we are missing the opportunity to do so much more with our business than we would if we just looked at our immediate economy.
I know that makes perfect sense. Okay, so what would you say? Would you say that this is okay? So you did say about other countries. That was the next question. Is this
Yeah,
true for minority businesses here as well as other countries? So yeah,
yeah. I
exactly.
see this too. We've defined minority businesses differently in different countries, right? In the US,
That's interesting.
when we talk about minority businesses, minority is such a broad category, and we've made it broad because there's so many groups of people that have been disenfranchised in the US, right? We can point to African Americans, Latino, the Asian Pacific community, those very specific that's considered minority, but also that the people that fall within that category are women. So women-owned businesses. Also, veteran-owned businesses can fall within minority category, and also LGBTQ plus owned businesses. So, in the work that I was doing with the Commerce Department, we touched on all of those different communities and made sure that the outreach was going out to those business communities or business groups so that they had the resources to do exporting. Now, it could be different in another country. Like we were talking about that a little bit before the call.
Yeah.
Minority is, it varies around the world. And they don't might not even use that term. It might just be, disenfranchised, for example. So I think no matter what kind of walk of life you're from, there's a benefit to even telling your story, right? So that people even know about who you are as a people, but then also doing business outside of your immediate community because that's how businesses grow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, like when I think of the world as like one big Venn diagram. So when you have, for example, with pretty colors. Um, so for example, if you have a woman owned veteran, maybe even disabled veteran,
Oh, I forgot
um,
disability too. Disability also
yeah,
falls in that category.
right. So there's so many overlaps. When it comes to programs like within the US where they are addressing or even like contracts awarded. I know that they're set aside, when you're
Mhm.
when you're bidding on stuff for the government. Um, is there do they multiply the chances that you'll get something if you are in more than one category as a
You know,
minority?
I can't really speak to government contracting because that's not what I did when I was with the government. Um, I don't know how to answer that question because
Oh,
I know that there's like a point system, and then you get an extra point if you're, if it's a minority, or a point if you're a woman, a point if you're disabled. But honestly, I don't want to go down that path because that's just not my area of expertise.
no, totally get it. Totally get it. Okay, so what does an inclusive global trade ecosystem even look like?
In a perfect world, and even here in Los Angeles, where I'm based here in LA, um, when there are programs or when there are opportunities for people to engage, and I think of it from a government perspective, you have a fair representation of people from various different groups. I would say when I was in the government, up until I did the GDEI, the Global Diversity Export Initiative, and some of the other things that I led, I was in the room, even in Los Angeles, with all the diversity in the world, with, and I was the only person that looked like me. So really trying to create environments where you have different types of businesses at the table. That one, they know that that opportunity exists because the knowledge of that opportunity is like the biggest hurdle to overcome. And then two, where they're able to access the resources and do business across borders like any other business, right? You have a
Yeah.
diverse representation of businesses. And so the work that I was doing with commerce, we sought to have that type of representation, and we would go to the various different business groups. So you have your Black chamber, you have your Latino chamber, you have your Asian chamber, you have like these cluster of groups, and making sure we were interacting with them all so that they all had the same information so that they could do business.
Other than like physically going there, are there other like channels of communication that you can tap into to reach people that, would be affiliated with those different networking
Um,
groups?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, presence is everything, especially when you're trying to build trust with various different business groups. And
Yeah.
the work that I was doing back then, and I talk about that work, but that has carried on into the work that I'm doing today still. You have to show up and you have to build trust within communities for them to even be receptive of the information that you have. I mean, obviously, especially here in the US, people are skeptical, of someone outside coming into their protected and sacred spaces, right? The reason
Yeah.
why there is a Black chamber is because years ago you couldn't interact with the regular chamber of commerce, or the reason why there is a Latino or an Asian chamber is because that community has come together to create that safe space for their businesses to thrive. And so when
Yeah.
you step into their groups, then you need to go in a certain way, obviously very respectful, but then also you have to build the relationship and that trust so that you can then convey the information that you want to convey. And about exporting, one of the things that I would say is whenever we would go to those different groups, there were so many resources that exist that they had no idea even existed. And so providing that and being a a resource to them for something that is available for everyone, but you have to know that it exists to even take advantage of it.
Exactly. Awareness is everything. So, what are some of the misconceptions that exist with regard to minority-owned businesses competing globally?
Well, one is that they don't compete globally, right?
Oh my God.
People think,
Right?
oh, well, yeah, they're not doing, but then you start peeling back and be like, oh, wait a minute, there are, especially when you're talking about when you're connecting, obviously from a Black perspective, Black owned businesses connecting back to Africa, Asian owned businesses connecting back to their places of origin. The same with Latino. So there's a lot of that organic connections that happen with them doing business cross border with the communities from which they came. And but then also I was always shocked and to learn that there was super successful businesses that have been doing businesses for years, minority owned businesses and utilizing various different resources and are major employers here in the US. So they do indeed exist. It's a matter of just shining a spotlight on those businesses so that people know, because a lot of times people don't tell how successful they are and don't want to be a target or and also their
Yeah.
competition. But yeah, I think there is a misconception that, minority businesses don't do global business. But then also a misconception that, oh, they're all too small. And that was definitely something that I ran into when I was doing that work with the GDEI program, was
Mhm.
identifying companies that were export ready, that were minority owned and export ready. There was the assumption that because they were minority owned, they were not ready for this. And I think, there's a lot of grit and there's a lot of ingenuity with minority businesses because they've had to overcome so much just to be in business, a lot of the challenges. But
Yeah.
a lot of them was super impressive with the work. And I continue to stay in touch with a lot of businesses that I've worked with in the past. So I know it's possible.
Yeah. No, clearly it is. So, how do you identify the right international markets for your clients?
Well, I think it depends on the industry. You know, every every business is not right for every market. Depends on what you're selling, who your clients are, who your targeted demographics. So when you're looking at where should a company go into business, I have probably a million questions I ask a company. Who's buying your product here in the US if you're just doing business here in the US? Or sometimes people weren't even doing business in the US, they wanted to go straight overseas. And there's a misconception that, oh, you can't just go straight overseas. But then I've met businesses that only did business overseas. They didn't do anything local. So I think it really depends on the industry sector. It depends on what type of product or service you're offering. And when I think exports, I'm thinking both something that's manufactured and put in a box and shipped somewhere, and a lot of the things that are not put in a box, right? You could be doing architecture and engineering services, which is something that I specialized in, or some type of consulting services, and you have clients all over the world. So you can look for opportunities based on what is your expertise, what does the market need, do you have what the market need. So those are some of the things that I look at and I talk to when I'm looking at a client.
So does it have to be something they originate, like they are the creators of XYZ service, or they physically provide it, or virtually provide it, or it's a SaaS, or it's a manufacturer? What about if they're a distributor? They're a strong distributor here, they understand distribution, and they want to be a distributor overseas. Do they have to be, in fact, the manufacturer if it's still like a physical product?
Not necessarily, but they do have to have the permission. Like the manufacturer has to grant someone who's looking at exporting their product that they're just it's like, I'll give you a good example. There's a lot of ways you can do exporting. There's like the right way and I would say the wrong way to do stuff.
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who export stuff. They don't have permission to do it. They go to Costco, buy it in bulk, and then ship it out, right? Which I do not recommend. That's not a sustainable business practice. But then there are people who have permission from the manufacturer, and they might even give them the territory and say, okay, well, now we'll designate you as our distributor for this product to a certain part of the world or even a
Right.
certain country. And then that gives you a whole, you don't have to, so you're not actually manufacturing the product, but you're responsible for developing that territory for them. And that's actually a great opportunity, especially if you know that country or that territory very well and you have the right connections and you know how to navigate it. Because the manufacturer doesn't want to spend the time, they just want to make their product, right? And make sure they have sales. So I think it really depends on, again, the type of industry sector, what are you selling, all of those things, and also just navigating the regulations that depending on what you're selling. So for instance, if you're talking about defense equipment or something, satellite technology, things that are like really highly controlled, that is not
Yeah,
something that you can just go and sell for somebody. But if we're talking
clearly.
about, oh, you want to be the representative for a specific like food product, or you're looking at you know I'm trying to think of a medical equipment. You want to represent a medical equipment manufacturer, which we're super strong in here in California. Then there's great opportunities for you to go represent that country in a particular market overseas. And a lot of times they look for an overseas distributor too. So if you can help bridge that gap for them, that's a very valuable place to be in.
And it helps the manufacturer. So it's kind of
Mhm.
spreading, everybody's area of expertise is kind of everybody does their part in the
Yeah, you leverage people, you leverage their contacts. You also leverage their expertise. Because if you think about it, if I'm a manufacturer, I won't have expertise in 200 plus countries around the world. But what I can have is have relationships with people who have that expertise and that can help me develop my brand or my business in a particular market.
right. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. So, what is cultural fluency and why is it as important as product or pricing? Like, how does it play into everything?
Well, I think, and this is what, I always think about the ugly American example. Americans kind of go in and we're like, we're gonna do it our way or the highway. And it's like that doesn't quite work, in around the world. Although, we're seeing some of that play out right now. So I would just say that you really need to understand who you're doing business with. And sometimes it can make or break an actual deal if you offend someone or you do something that's inappropriate. People can pack up and go home and be like, okay, well, this is not someone I want to do business with. And so I think being culturally fluent is just taking the time to understand who you're working with. What are their cultural nuances? What things should you be looking for, or what things should you expect, or what's disrespectful in that country? I remember like, traveling in Asia, it's like don't show people the bottom of your shoe. Just, very, things that we don't think about, especially if you put your feet up when you're sitting down. But that could be really offensive to someone and then also cause them not to want to do business with you.
Yeah, etiquette for starters. Is cultural fluency the same thing as localization, or is it part of localization, or is localization part of cultural fluency? Like, because I hear both of those terms.
Yeah, I think so. So when you're offering a product or a service, it needs to be something that resonates locally with who you're trying to sell it to. And if you don't have that cultural context with what you're selling, it might not, it could be something that's hot here in the US or hot in whatever country, but then you try to sell it across to another country and you don't alter it in any way and it doesn't have the same receptivity, right? So I think, and there's tons of examples, major corporations who have gone in and launched a product in a new market and didn't realize the name of the product when it translated in an offensive way, or there's a lot of that use of those types of examples. And I think if they would have just kind of paused and said, and maybe even did a test to see what was the reaction locally from what they were introducing, they could have caught that instead of spending sometimes millions of dollars to launch something that doesn't resonate. So yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
very important, and I think it's often overlooked. You know,
Yeah, I think they just, well, we've got a big name here, so we're going to go and be big somewhere else.
right,
And they're going to love us. How could they not love us? What's not to love?
right.
But it's different when you get somewhere else.
Yeah, and I saw that a lot in like China, right? Where, there were some things that just didn't, we I think the probably was a really good example is like Uber. I want to say Uber like failed significantly in China just because they got another platform, which I mean we could talk about competition and all that kind of stuff and what's fair and unfair, that kind of copied what they did, but they localized it in a way that Uber couldn't even compete in the market. Or you can even look at Google, all of these different things, and there is a regulatory component to that as well. But at the
Right.
end of the day, businesses have spent millions and sometimes even billions of dollars to try to break into a new market, and it flops. And because that localization that's so important to make sure that what you're doing in one market will translate to another.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, what early mistakes do you tend to see, and how can you help your clients avoid them?
One of the biggest ones, and this is for minority businesses, this is for any business, is just protecting your intellectual property. I think when
Um,
you're out there in the global marketplace and you're doing business, intellectual property is always is what how we defined it here is different than how it's defined in other markets. And so I have even talked to businesses and said, look, even if you're not thinking about exporting anytime soon, you still need to make sure you have a good IP lawyer who has protected your idea, because it doesn't prevent someone from coming to the US, seeing what you've done, and then going back and replicating it or filing your trademark in their particular country. So I think really having a keen sense of how IP works and how it works here, but also how it works in other markets is really important. That's a big one. I know the U.S. government does a lot to try to support U.S. companies in the global marketplace around IP protection, and that's something that I always like kind of caution people about. Make sure you protected your IP.
yeah, and it's hard too because it's expensive to protect it. There's what 195 countries, like some of them you're not going to worry about, but
Yeah,
and then so you can protect it at a certain point, but then you have to be able to enforce it. Like protection is, oh,
right.
I'm protected because you have filed something or whatever. But enforcing that protection is
Yeah,
also a
can be a
very
challenge.
expensive
Yeah, that can be
endeavor.
expensive. But it's like things like the Madrid Protocol, things like that, that companies can tap into and make sure they're covered, at least on the surface level. I mean, if you have something like high tech, patented technology, that sort of thing. Sometimes I've even seen companies that say, well, we're not going to apply for a patent, because even that can be a little sus depending on the government agencies that you're working with. And it's probably better that, and they know that, oh, I couldn't go after them if they copied it, or they would never be able to copy this because it's so specialized. So I think having good patent and trademark advice is, and early on, is one of the biggest things. It's so important. And I'm not a lawyer, so I just know that if I have something, I need to protect it, because someone can steal my idea, or they can steal your idea and start developing other markets without you. So, and I think that's a big fear that a lot of people have or should have, because it has been done. So, yeah, that's a major one.
Real quickly, what is the Madrid Protocol?
It's like I can't remember. There's now you're testing my knowledge.
I'm sorry, but
There's
you
a
brought it
bunch of
up.
countries that have signed on to the Madrid Protocol, and you can apply and have some type of a certification through that platform, and it protects you through multiple countries.
Okay,
So
so it's like it kind of
It's
like
like a
magnifies
treaty.
whatever you've got in your
Yeah,
country. It's good for another bunch.
yeah, it's
Okay.
like a treaty that a bunch of countries have signed on to that have the same kind of protections for if
Uh,
you get if you get it, it's kind of like doing business in the EU, right? You go to one market, then you can do business in all of them. It's like you get that
yeah.
certificate, then you have protection and on several levels. But it's a difference between copyright and trademark and patent.
Trademark
So
and
that's why you would need a lawyer to really kind of help
yeah.
you walk you through to make sure, oh, well, I have Madrid, I'm covered under the Madrid Protocol. Well, what does that mean? And making sure that you truly are protected.
Yeah. And then for stuff coming into the US, I know we're talking about exporting, but we had
Hmm.
Jen Diaz on from Diaz Trade Law. I had her on last year or the year before. Protecting like trademarks and stuff. CBP has some amazing
They do check.
abilities to protect, people from like knockoffs coming in and such
Do.
for the trademark itself, which is a lovely thing to have. So yeah, so many things, so many things that can be
Yeah,
done.
and I would just say
Yeah.
within Commerce, they have an office. It's called Stop Fakes. It's like stopfakes.gov, and they have a lot of toolkits. Like all this information is out there. It's free information. Toolkits to help you by country how to protect your IPR for your business because that is such a big that's such a biggie for a lot of businesses. And it's
And that's
not a problem
Department of
until it's a
Commerce, or is
problem.
that Department of
It's
Commerce?
commerce. It's because
Okay.
I want to say, oh gosh, you're testing my knowledge. Stopfakes.gov. And they do road shows around the US. And then they also work with foreign governments too, because it's, people think I'm just gonna do a big a quick check. Oh yeah, it's stopfakes.gov. And that brings a lot of the resources together that for intellectual property from different agencies from the US government. So within commerce, where I worked was the International Trade Administration, which was trade promotion, but you also have the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that they're the
You
ones
do.
who
Yeah.
where you file your patents and trademarks with. So and then they also have what's called attaches in key markets around the world
Uh,
where they can help U.S. companies protect their intellectual property in those markets.
okay, fantastic.
Hmm.
So, how do you determine export readiness and move your clients from training, like you've imparted all the information you possibly can, now they're ready to
Hmm.
go out in the world and generate revenue? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I say get as much knowledge as you can before you go anywhere. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of free knowledge out there through commerce, through your local small business development center. This is from the U.S. perspective, but
I
it,
love the
and
SBDC. Yes.
yeah, but most countries have something that helps small businesses. Canada, I know Canada has it. I know there's people from all over the world that are on. So I would check with your local government business resources to see what type of training, either low cost or no cost training that they have. And then the advice that I always give people and I think it's the best way to go from the book knowledge to the actual implementation is one, you got to get on a plane and you got to go where you're trying to do business. And you can't go everywhere, but you got to go. You got to get out of whatever country you're in and go to your target market and start learning that target market. Because without those connections, without really understanding how business is done in a particular country, it's really tough. It's almost like you're
Yeah.
you're rolling the dice every time. And there's a lot of groups, like even like the Global Chamber. I know they have like meetups at various different trade shows and things like that. All of those things are super valuable because it helps you to develop relationships and develop people that can help you along your journey in exporting. And it takes expertise. I think another big mistake that companies make is they think they got to know everything and do it all by themselves. And you don't have to, you just have to have the right support and have a network of people who can help you move you along through that process.
And that makes sense. So, what
Hmm.
role do public sector partners and institutional buyers play in all of this?
Well, I will say this, and this is from the US perspective. From a public sector, and obviously a lot of this is shifting. We're in the midst of a lot of shifting, right, in the international space. So you kind of have to like watch it and see what's still there, see what's changing, see what's, still what's still available. But they really, from a US perspective, the US government is so undervalued in the sense of how businesses are supported. And even from a local level, California is a little bit different because we don't have the same resources, but at the state level and city level in a lot of states, they have resources to help small businesses with going global. And so I would say there's a huge role that they play, especially for small and medium sized, for minority owned, for businesses that don't have that in-house expertise to tap into those public sector organizations. Because the bottom line is they want you to be successful. Because when a small business is successful, that's local jobs, right? When you want to create local jobs. So
Right.
the business or public sector plays a large role in that. Also helping with de-risking as well. When I think about the Export Import Bank, which a lot of people don't know about,
Excellent.
that
Yeah.
using export import to ensure a shipment that you're sending overseas so that if your buyer doesn't pay, um, man, that's I had so many people who lose money because they didn't know that they could get insurance on a shipment. So those types of resources are really valuable. When I think about institutional buyers, I think about multinational type companies and a lot of small businesses and even especially minority businesses are global just because they have a customer that is global. So if you have, depending on your industry sector, you can tap into, you have a contract with a multinational that's in 150 countries, then you could by default be in 150 countries because you're selling to them and wherever they're doing business. So that's a great way to expand and go international as well.
Okay, that's amazing. I hadn't thought about that.
Hmm.
How can cities better align local economic development with global trade? Because it has to start like in everybody's
Yeah,
own backyard, right?
it does. It does. And I will say that that's something that I've struggled with in LA, because LA is such a global city. You don't have to leave Los Angeles to, tap into every country around the world. They're all
Right.
here, which is beautiful. That's what I love about Los Angeles. Um, and so there's not as many resources I would say that are available at the city level. The mayor's office does a great job of promoting Los Angeles and trying to make those connections. We have a very strong consular corps, the consulates that are, and you can tap into them here at the local level. But when I think about that question, aligning with global trade. And also you have our ports, right? You got the Port of LA, Port of Long Beach.
Or in Long
Those are
Beach, yeah.
all local economic development engines that really push that want to see businesses do well because if you're selling, you got to go through the port to get your product out, right? If you're selling a product. So
Right.
though all of those resources for in LA, they all exist. It can be fragmented at times. But I think when you think about a local authorities, they can provide training for small businesses, for minority owned businesses, and really target those communities and talk about how to navigate trade.
Mhm.
They can also, funding is always a huge issue for especially minority owned businesses. How do you tap into capital so that you can, you know, if you get a huge order, how do you fulfill it if you don't have the working capital to do it? So from a local level,
Help
providing
with
those
that,
types
but
of resources is really
yeah,
important.
yeah, no, that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Mhm.
So, why should policymakers see minority-owned exporters as strategic assets? Well, first of all, do they even recognize them? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So, depending on where you're from, where you're at,
yeah,
we're just living in such tumultuous times when it comes to anything that's considered, this kind of falls in like a DEI category, and it's really unsettling with the conversations that we're having, at the national level in this country. But, from a minority business perspective, there minority businesses are important because at the local level you're providing jobs, you're creating economic development. So any policymaker worth their salt, they want jobs in their community. And if you're not supporting the minority businesses, the women owned businesses, those that need the most help, then it's almost like you're missing the boat, right? You want to make sure those companies are supported and have the resources they need to grow and to thrive so that you have strong communities. So it definitely aligns. I think sometimes people don't see it that way because they don't
Mhm.
understand global trade, or global trade is seen as just like a big company. That's what big companies do. But I don't want to throw out any statistics because I don't remember. But the majority of our exporters are SMEs, or small and medium-sized enterprises. So there is a role, from a policymaker standpoint, to make sure that the resources that are needed, whether it's through the SBA, right, Small Business Administration, or through the Department of Commerce, that those resources exist so that those companies can continue to grow and to take advantage of the opportunity to do business outside of the US.
Right. And I think a lot of people too, when you say small, medium-sized enterprise or business, SMB, SME, however you call it, I think people aren't aware that it's actually bigger than you would think. I don't recall the numbers, but I think it's like up to 500 employees or
Oh,
something, which
yes.
so
We've got 500 employees.
and that's still considered small. But when you compare
Yeah,
it to, you know, like a Xerox or an IBM or an
right,
Apple, then it's not that big. But
right,
and another thing that people don't realize is that the XM Bank is not really a bank.
right.
you
It's
know,
not about,
like why come up with a different name for that one? But at any rate, there are resources that are out there for
yeah,
people. So that's
yeah, those are
important.
great resources. And then also, there's been some shifting happening, but there's a lot of government institutions that exist to support um, doing business outside of the US. I'm thinking of the DFC, which is a finance corporation, development finance corporation, which you see a lot of the cuts that have happened over the past year.
Yeah.
DFC, I think their budget increased, and it's a way that international development is happening, and they're using private sector capital combined with public sector funds to do development projects. And I think that that's where a shift has happened, where it's not. I've heard the term trade, not aid type of thing. Um, and that shift had been happening, just so you know, before this administration. But you see more creative ways to do international development.
The old, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a
Yeah,
lifetime kind of thing,
yeah, yeah.
which makes sense. So when you and I spoke previously, you had mentioned an organization I was not previously aware of, and that's the National Minority Supplier Development Center, or NMSDC for short.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and looked online, and they have global affiliates in Australia, Canada, China, South Africa, UK, India, Brazil, and Chile. How what do they do for minorities? How are they helpful to minority exporters in the US and other countries as well, as far as you know?
Yeah, well, I worked with them when I was at Commerce, and that is
Oh,
an organization that kind of spawned out of the civil rights movement in the US, and really kind of helped to create opportunities for minority businesses to get not necessarily government contracts, but corporate contracts. So by getting approval or getting the certification from NMSDC, and I think it's the Minority Supply Development Council, but by getting their kind of stamp of
oh,
approval, then the corporates who have committed to spending so much money, even all corporates have, like, okay, we're going to have set asides for small businesses, we have set asides for minority businesses, women owned businesses, blah, blah, blah. Um, by working with getting that certification, then it's almost like your business has been kind of is certified. And so a corporate partner will know, okay, well, we have this many minority businesses, certified minority businesses that are part of our contracts. And it's kind of been a trickle down thing, because even when a big large corporation gets a government contract, like multi-billion-dollar government contract, there's so much of that contract that has set aside a part of it. Now we're seeing all of that being disrupted, right? There's so much disruption right now. But I think what NMSDC does, and the reason why they have international chapters, or is probably two reasons. And I'd have to bring someone from NMSDC on, or introduce you to someone so they could really talk about this, because they're going through
that would be
transformation as
great.
well. But a lot of those corporates have entities in those markets that you named, and then they also have indigenous people. Like in Canada, for example, they have an indigenous population. Australia has an indigenous population or disenfranchised. So as those corporates are making these global commitments, when you think about the UN and commitments to reduce poverty and whatnot, they have those set asides and they have to, how do you certify, how do you know a company is disenfranchised? So that's how they have grown, not just here in the US, but the model isn't necessarily the same because what defines minority could be different. But it's a mechanism for them to help support those companies that have been disenfranchised and get them into that pipeline of those corporates, because that's a great way to grow from, grow a business. You're getting those contracts. So it really is a whole ecosystem. And when I found out about them and started working with them, I was blown away. Businesses can, how they get government contracts, but then there's also the corporate contracts. And that's how they grow and develop, into major businesses themselves. They follow those big corporates because the corporation, even though they're huge, they probably got 10,000 employees or whatnot, they still rely on small or medium-sized businesses, and they have a commitment, a corporate commitment to minority businesses as well.
Okay, interesting. Wow,
Yeah.
cool.
We
Okay,
talk
so
about
this is perfect,
ecosystem, that's a whole ecosystem in and of itself.
which is great because someone's, I'm sure it took a long time to develop that, and
Yeah,
it's which is fantastic. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. We've got about 5 minutes.
right.
So anybody that wants to take themselves off mute at this time, I have a couple more questions I could ask you, and I might ask you, but
Yeah.
in case
Mhm.
anybody wants to ask any questions, now is a good time to do that. And if not, then I will
I
definitely.
have a few questions. Actually,
Okay.
this is Natalie. Jerome, can you
Camera
hear
on
me?
so we can see you.
Uh, sure. Hold on a moment.
Natalie, because there we go. Yes, we want the
Okay.
hi.
Hey, big hair. Hello. Hi,
Hi.
Terry. So
Hi.
nice to hear
Hi.
you speak. I haven't heard about your background before. So one thing I'm curious about is how valuable is Mandarin and how much do you get to use it? Is it something you would recommend? Because there are a lot of arrows pointing toward Asia and China in particular.
hmm I will say for my career, knowing Chinese has been the game changer for me. I when I have two kids, my oldest daughter, before she learned how to write her name, she was in Mandarin class. So I was like, you're gonna learn Chinese. Even though she's chosen to be a Spanish major now in college, but that's okay. She still got introduced to the language. I think Mandarin is very valuable, especially if you're looking to do business in China. That is what opened so many doors for me to be able to, to have that, to get that connection beyond just saying, "Oh, hey, ni hao," to really have a conversation with someone. I mean, talk about barriers like dropping when, you can speak to them in their mother tongue. The dynamic and the relationship with China has changed. And I first went to China in almost 30 years ago. So 97 was when I studied in Beijing. And so I've seen kind of like the rise and also the fall of our relationship with China. But I will still say it is one of the most important relationships. And if my kids were 5 years old now, I would still be putting them in Chinese because it is definitely a language and a culture that we should know, and we shouldn't turn away from just because our relationship isn't the same. It's still an important economic relationship, and it's just to your advantage. It's to anyone's advantage, to anywhere you're doing business in, to learn some of the language or some of the culture of who you're dealing with.
Okay. Another question I have is about certifications.
Hmm.
So I work with a few different chambers, and I am starting to, I guess by default, fall into a consultant capacity because I'm meeting people that have come to the US, have attended some of our conferences, and they're looking to enter the US market. And you have
Hmm.
certifications that I've been looking into, and I don't know how valuable they would be. So, in your opinion, for instance, the Certified US Export Compliance Officer or the certified import professional. Do you think that there's any value in that, or is it better to just maybe find a mentor or work for a company that knows what they're doing and
Hmm.
help individuals in that way?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think when you're trying to do business cross border, it's really important to understand what that process is. Like when you're moving product from one country to another, what does it mean? What are the documentation that you need to have? What's the insurance? What's the tax? All of those things? It's good to have that working knowledge, but then it's also good to have a mentor. It's good to have someone who's doing it that can help coach you as well, or as you're helping other companies that you can say, because, there's a lot of liability involved and, mistakes can cost a lot of money. So I would say yes, yes, and yes. You want to get as much knowledge. I'm not an export compliance um, certified export compliance person. That's something that's very specific as well. If you're doing a lot of high tech exports and or you're working in like the defense sector or areas where you need export licensing, that sort of thing. So you really need to know what you're doing because I mean, if you get hit with a fine by the government because you violated some type of a rule, that could be devastating. So I would say you get as much knowledge and do and have as much support as you can, but then also, work with people as well that can help you.
Okay. Well, I've
So
sent you
hopefully
a
that answered your question.
yeah, yeah. I've sent you a request on LinkedIn, so I hope to talk with
Okay,
you more.
I'll
Thank you
stay
so much.
connected. I'll be happy to point you in towards resources too that might be supportive of you as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you, Natalie, for the question. So we are right at the perfect time here. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for the Global Chamber Export Import Forum, and special thanks to Terry, who's just so incredibly knowledgeable. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please join us next month. It's the fourth Thursday of the month until we get to the end of the year, and then we work the dates around a little bit. But the next one is on Thursday, February 26th, same time, noon Pacific time. And for any other meetings that you might want to attend, do check out the Global Chambers events calendar. There's always something going on pretty much 24/7. We have people who are, it's like midnight for them now. So thank you again. Take care. Just remember, it's great to be global and reach out to the people that you saw in the chat today and connect and get some global business going.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're,
Appreciate it, Anita.
you're very welcome. Welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.